Keanu Reeves had always been known as the quiet one. No scandals, no trash talk, no need to prove anything. While Hollywood thrived on noise, Keanu moved differently, calm, respectful, almost invisible when he wanted to be. He trained in silence, spoke with humility, and walked away from conflict more often than he stepped into it. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, carried a very different energy. Confident, intimidating, unapologetically bold. A man whose presence alone seemed to dare others to test him. So when rumors began circulating online that Keanu Reeves had challenged Steven Seagal, people laughed. Keanu? That Keanu? No way. Clips, comments, and speculation spread fast. Some claimed it was just a misunderstanding. Others said it was blown out of proportion. But one thing was clear, something had shifted. Because Keanu wasn't denying it. And that silence, it made the noise even louder. This is what made the situation so unsettling. Keanu Reeves isn't the type of man who seeks confrontation. So when a person like that is connected to a challenge, people start asking why. Was it pride? Was it principle? Or was it something much deeper? As the internet debated, fans quickly took sides. Some believed Steven's confidence alone would overwhelm anyone. Others pointed out something different, that discipline, control, and patience often outweigh raw aggression. Before we go further, where are you watching this from? Comment your country and city below. Because what happens next isn't just about two names, it's about how different people define strength. Backstage whispers grew louder. Insiders hinted that Keanu had been quietly preparing for years, not for fame, not for attention, but for mastery. Meanwhile, Steven's reputation continued to loom large, built on dominance and intimidation. Two paths, two mindsets, one unexpected collision. Do you think the most dangerous people are the loudest or the calmest? Comment loud or calm. The world waited. Because if Keanu Reeves truly stepped forward this time, then Steven Seagal might have been facing something he never anticipated. And what happened next changed everything. As the rumors refused to die down, one thing became obvious. This wasn't just about a challenge anymore. It was about contrast. On one side stood Steven Seagal, a man long associated with dominance, confidence, and confrontation. His public image had always been loud in its own way. When Steven entered a room, people noticed. When his name was mentioned, assumptions followed. Power, intimidation, control. On the other side was Keanu Reeves. A man who rarely spoke unless necessary. A man who avoided drama so consistently that people forgot how much disciplined silence actually requires. Keanu didn't posture, he didn't mock, he didn't respond to online noise. And that's what made people uneasy. Because when someone known for avoiding conflict suddenly doesn't step back, it forces everyone to rethink the situation. In real life, most confrontations aren't decided by strength alone. They're shaped by mindset. The loudest person in the room often feels powerful, but the calmest person usually sees the clearest. As discussions exploded online, fans dissected every detail. Old interviews resurfaced. Training footage was rewatched, body language analyzed. People weren't just picking sides, they were projecting their own beliefs about strength. Some said, Steven has the experience, he's built for intimidation. Others argued, Keanu doesn't need to prove anything, and that's exactly why he's dangerous. Audience question, what matters more in a real confrontation, experience or self-control? Comment experience or control. Steven eventually addressed the rumors, not directly, but with confidence that left little room for doubt. His tone suggested amusement, even dismissal. To him, the idea of being challenged by someone so quiet seemed almost laughable. And that reaction did something unexpected. It shifted the pressure. Because confidence can be reassuring, but it can also become a blind spot. Overconfidence has a strange effect. It convinces you that preparation is unnecessary, that the opponent is already understood, that surprises are unlikely. History has shown That's usually when surprises happen. Meanwhile, Stephen remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no clarifications. Just absence. And absence has weight. Fans began asking the real question, why isn't he responding? Was he being respectful, or was he simply unconcerned? Audience opinion question. If you were Keanu, would you explain yourself or stay silent? Comment speak or silent. Behind the scenes, speculation deepened. People close to Keanu hinted that this wasn't about ego or proving dominance. They suggested something else, a line crossed, a principle challenged, a moment that demanded stillness instead of noise. Stephen's confidence continued to project outward, but the audience's attention was quietly drifting, not toward volume, toward restraint. Because the more Stephen appeared certain, the more people wondered what he might be overlooking. And then, just as opinions seemed locked in, a detail surfaced. A detail about what Keanu had been quietly preparing for years, far from cameras, far from attention. A detail that made people pause mid-comment and reconsider everything they thought they knew. Do you think the most dangerous opponent is the one you see coming, or the one you don't? Because once that detail came out, the balance began to shift, and Steven Seagal may have already made his biggest mistake.
As more details surfaced, the narrative began to tilt, and Steven Seagal could feel it. What had started as light dismissal slowly turned into something else. Pressure. The kind that doesn't shout, but lingers. The kind that grows louder the more you ignore it. Steven had always thrived in moments like this. Confidence was his armor. Reputation his shield. For years, people had stepped back before things ever went too far. Not because he demanded it, but because his presence alone often ended the conversation. And to Steven, this situation felt no different. Keanu Reeves was still silent, still calm, still refusing to play the game. Steven interpreted that silence as weakness. He's an actor, people close to Steven reportedly said. He plays tough roles, that's it. And Steven believed it. This is where many confrontations quietly turn dangerous, not because of hatred or anger, but because of assumption. When we believe we already understand someone, we stop paying attention. Steven's confidence wasn't fake. It was earned through years of dominance and control. But confidence, when left unchecked, can slowly evolve into something else. Overconfidence. Online, the debate grew sharper. Fans dissected Steven's posture, his tone, his history. Some praised his certainty. Others warned that certainty without curiosity often leads to miscalculation. Audience question. Have you ever underestimated someone and realized too late that you were wrong? Comment yes or no. As Steven continued to project assurance, something subtle began happening in the background. People weren't reacting to what he was saying anymore. They were reacting to what Keanu wasn't. No rebuttals, no defense, no attempt to control the narrative. Just restraint. And restraint made people uncomfortable. When someone refuses to explain themselves, our minds fill the gap. Silence forces imagination to work, and imagination is often more powerful than facts. Was Keanu ignoring the noise because he didn't care? Or because he didn't need to? Speculation turned into investigation. Old training stories resurfaced. People began connecting dots they had never bothered to connect before. Not rumors, patterns, discipline, consistency. A long history of preparation without performance. Meanwhile, Steven's confidence grew louder, almost as if he needed it to. Jokes were made, comparisons drawn, subtle mockery crept into the conversation. And that's when the shift happened. Not publicly, not explosively. Internally. Because confidence that needs reinforcement often masks uncertainty. Audience opinion question. When someone jokes instead of staying focused, do you see confidence or insecurity? Comment confidence or insecurity. The audience began to notice something Steven hadn't. Keanu was controlling the pace without ever stepping forward. Steven was reacting. Keanu was waiting. And waiting is a powerful position. In confrontations, the person who rushes usually reveals more than they intend to. The one who waits gathers information without effort. Steven believed he was in control because he was visible, vocal, certain. But control doesn't always announce itself. Behind the scenes, more details leaked, not dramatic, not flashy, but enough to make people pause. Accounts of discipline, stories of respect, years of preparation without ego.
Suddenly, the conversation changed. Not who would win, but what does Keanu know that Steven doesn't? Audience question. Do you think silence is a strategy or just avoidance? Common strategy or avoidance? Steven sensed the shift but misread its meaning. Instead of slowing down, he leaned further into certainty. That decision, subtle as it seemed, was critical. Because the louder confidence becomes, the more fragile it often is. The public pressure mounted. Steven's name was everywhere. Expectations grew heavier. The image of dominance demanded maintenance. Keanu still said nothing. And in that nothing, something very loud was forming. The most dangerous moment in any confrontation isn't the clash. It's the moment right before it, when one side believes the outcome is already decided. Steven believed he was standing on familiar ground. He wasn't. Because the truth was slowly emerging, not through words, not through challenges, but through history. What Keanu had been quietly building for years. What he had chosen never to advertise. What Steven had never bothered to look for. Was about to come into the light. If you discovered your opponent had been preparing longer than you ever imagined, would you still move forward? Because once that preparation was revealed, this was no longer about confidence. It was about awareness. And Steven Seagal was about to realize he had been fighting the wrong battle all along. For days, the conversation had circled around one question.
Why wasn't Keanu Reeves saying anything? In a world where people rush to defend their image, his silence felt almost unnatural. No statements, no interviews, no attempts to clarify or calm the storm, just distance. And that distance started to feel intentional. As speculation grew louder, a different kind of story began to surface, not from headlines, but from patterns. People started looking backward instead of forward, not at rumors, but at behavior. That's when the tone changed. When someone stays quiet under pressure, there are usually two reasons: fear or certainty. And fear rarely lasts this long. Pieces of Keanu's life that had always existed quietly were suddenly being noticed. His discipline, his routine, his respect for structure and learning. Not flashy moments, consistent ones. Fans noticed something strange. Keanu had never talked much about preparation, yet preparation seemed to follow him everywhere. Stories emerged of intense training schedules, long-term commitment, and an almost obsessive respect for fundamentals. Nothing exaggerated, nothing theatrical, just years of repetition, patience, and control. Do you believe real strength is built loudly or quietly over time? Comment loudly or quietly. The more people looked, the clearer the contrast became. Steven's confidence had always been visible. Keanu's discipline had always been invisible. And invisible things are easy to underestimate. There's a difference between performance and preparation. Performance wants to be seen. Preparation doesn't need witnesses. Keanu had spent years mastering restraint, not just physically, but mentally. While others talked about dominance, he focused on control. While others embraced image, he embraced consistency. That didn't mean he was planning confrontation. It meant he was never afraid of it. As this realization spread, the public conversation shifted dramatically. People stopped asking if Keanu was capable. They started asking why he never needed to show it. Steven, meanwhile, began to feel the shift, though not fully understand it. Confidence still sat on his shoulders, but something else joined it now. Expectation. And expectation is heavy. The audience's curiosity had transformed into attention. Every move, every expression, every word Steven spoke was now measured against Keanu's silence. When attention suddenly turns towards someone who says nothing, does that make you more curious or more suspicious? Comment curious or suspicious? The contrast was impossible to ignore. Steven spoke. Keanu waited. Steven reacted. Keanu observed. Steven carried the weight of reputation. Keanu carried the freedom of restraint. Restraint isn't weakness, it's delayed action. It's the ability to remain still when movement would be easier. And people who master restraint rarely panic when pressure rises. That's when the most unsettling detail emerged. People who had trained with Keanu, quietly, respectfully, described a man who treated preparation like a lifestyle, not a phase. No shortcuts, no arrogance, just repetition and patience. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about who was louder, it was about who was ready. Steven had always prepared for confrontation by projecting dominance.
Keanu prepared by eliminating the need for projection. Which do you trust more, someone who tells you they're ready or someone who never has to? As this realization took hold, something subtle happened. Stephen's confidence didn't disappear, but it hardened. And hardened confidence often resists reflection. Because reflection requires slowing down. And slowing down feels dangerous when expectations are high. Keanu still didn't respond, but now his silence felt different. It wasn't absence, it was presence without noise. Some people prepare for a moment, others prepare for a lifetime. The difference becomes obvious only when pressure arrives. The audience could sense it. This wasn't about ego. This wasn't about proving toughness. This was about two philosophies colliding. One built on visibility, the other built on depth. Stephen stood firm in what he believed he knew. Keanu stood firm in what he didn't need to explain. If you realized your opponent wasn't silent because he was unsure, but because he was prepared, would that change how you moved forward? Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The silence wasn't hesitation, it was discipline. And once discipline meets expectation, something always gives. In the next moment, when the distance between them finally closed, Stephen would understand what the silence had been hiding all along.
The moment finally arrived, not with shouting, not with cameras flashing, but with a stillness so heavy it felt deliberate. For the first time since the rumors began, the distance between Keanu Reeves and Steven Seagal closed. No dramatic entrance, no aggressive posture, just two men standing in the same space and an atmosphere that felt completely different from before. Steven noticed it immediately. This wasn't the energy he expected. There was no nervousness in Keanu's stance, no hesitation, no need to prove anything. His posture was relaxed, balanced, not careless, but grounded, the kind of stillness that comes from familiarity, not uncertainty. And for the first time, Stephen didn't feel in control. This is a moment many people recognize in their own lives, when confidence suddenly meets something it can't read. Not resistance, not fear, just presence. Stephen had prepared for confrontation. He hadn't prepared for calm. Keanu spoke first, not loudly, not sharply, but clearly. "I don't want this to be what people think it is," he said. That sentence alone shifted the room. No challenge, no threat, no performance. Stephen expected bravado. What he got was restraint, and restraint is unsettling when you're used to dominance. When someone stays calm in a tense moment, does that make you feel safer or more uneasy? Comment, safer or uneasy. Stephen responded with confidence, but it sounded different now. Not weaker, just heavier, the kind of confidence that has suddenly become aware of an audience. "You think this ends without testing limits?" Stephen asked. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He paused, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he was choosing how to say it. People who rush to speak often do so to maintain control. People who pause are usually thinking beyond the moment. Keanu finally replied, "Limits get tested every day. I don't need this one." That was it. No insult, no superiority, just clarity. And clarity has a way of exposing things. Stephen felt it, the shift in perception, not just from others, but within himself. The dynamic he had expected wasn't there. The confrontation wasn't feeding him energy, it was draining it, because there was nothing to push against. If you were in Stephen's place right now, would you push forward or step back? Comment, push, or step back. Stephen tried to reassert control, not aggressively, but verbally. He spoke about experience, about presence, about reputation, things that had always worked before. Keanu listened, truly listened, and that somehow made it worse. Being ignored can feel insulting, but being heard without reaction can feel exposing. It forces you to confront your own words. When Stephen finished, Keanu nodded slightly. "I respect experience," he said, "but experience doesn't excuse misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding landed hard, because suddenly this wasn't about who was stronger. It was about who understood the moment better. The room felt smaller. Stephen realized something uncomfortable. He had been preparing for a fight, while Keanu had been prepared for a conversation. And conversations can be harder to win. Do you think real power is about control or understanding? Comment, control or understanding. Keanu continued, calm and measured. "I don't need to prove who I am," he said, "and I don't need to test you to know who you are." That sentence did something unexpected. It removed the stage. No winner, no loser, no spectacle. Just two men standing, one still holding on to expectation, the other releasing it. This is where many confrontations dissolve, not because someone loses, but because someone refuses to play the role assigned to them. Stephen had built his presence around certainty. Keanu had built his around acceptance, and acceptance is difficult to challenge. For a brief moment, Stephen considered pushing further. The old instinct rose, the familiar urge to dominate the narrative. But something stopped him. Not fear, awareness.
He saw it then that this situation wasn't elevating him, it was revealing him, and revelation can be uncomfortable. Have you ever realized mid-argument that you were fighting the wrong battle? Comment yes or no. Keanu took a step back, not retreating, just creating space. I don't want to take anything from you, he said. I just don't want to become something I'm not. That was the final shift, because strength that refuses corruption is hard to oppose. Stephen exhaled slowly. The tension didn't explode, it evaporated. Sometimes the strongest move isn't advancing or retreating, it's redefining the moment so conflict has nowhere to land. The audience, those watching closely, felt it. This wasn't about who could fight better. This wasn't about reputation. This was about who controlled themselves. And in that quiet moment it became clear, the real contest had already ended. If someone wins without throwing a punch, is that still a victory? Because what happened next, how Stephen responded to that realization, would define everything that followed, and not everyone is ready for that kind of truth.
When the moment passed, it didn't leave behind cheers or applause. It left silence. The kind of silence that follows realization, when noise no longer feels necessary, and words feel heavier than actions ever could. Steven Seagal stood still, processing what had just happened. Nothing dramatic had occurred, no confrontation, no clash of egos, and yet something had clearly ended. Keanu Reeves had already stepped away slightly, not turning its back, not retreating, simply removing himself from the center of the moment. It was a subtle gesture, but it carried meaning. He wasn't claiming victory, he was closing a chapter. This is the part most people misunderstand. We're taught that winning must look loud, someone standing tall while someone else falls. But real victories often look quiet, even uncomfortable. Stephen felt it now, the absence of adrenaline, the absence of opposition. Without resistance, his confidence had nowhere to land. And that's when it hit him. He hadn't lost a fight. He had lost the need for one. Have you ever walked away from a situation realizing you didn't actually need to win it? Comment yes or no. Around them, the atmosphere had changed. Observers, whether literal or symbolic, weren't reacting to dominance anymore. They were reacting to composure. Stephen had always believed strength meant standing firm. Keanu had just shown that strength could also mean stepping aside. Ego thrives on resistance. Take away resistance, and ego is forced to confront itself. That's often when growth begins, if a person allows it. Stephen exhaled, slower this time. He looked at Keanu, not as an opponent, but as something unfamiliar. A mirror, not reflecting power, but restraint. Stephen finally spoke again. His voice was steady, but different. You're not what I expected, he admitted. Keanu nodded slightly. Most people aren't. That exchange carried more weight than any argument could have. Is it harder to face an enemy or to face yourself? Comment enemy or yourself. For the first time since the rumors began, Stephen wasn't performing. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't defending a reputation. He was thinking. And thinking can be dangerous because it changes people. Moments like this don't feel powerful when they happen. They feel confusing. But confusion is often the doorway to understanding. Stephen realized something else too. Keanu hadn't come to challenge him. He had come to remove the illusion that a challenge was necessary. That realization reframed everything. The tension that once demanded release now demanded reflection. Stephen gave a small nod, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. I respect that, he said. Keanu replied simply, that's enough. And just like that, it was over. No headlines in the moment, no dramatic conclusion. Just two men walking away, one lighter than before, the other unchanged. That's the difference between winning externally and winning internally. One feeds the ego, the other reshapes it. Later, as the story spread, people tried to frame it the way they always do. Who won? Who backed down? Who had the upper hand? But those who paid attention knew better. This wasn't about hands. It was about control. If no one dominates and no one submits, does that make the outcome stronger or weaker? Comment stronger or weaker. Stephen reflected privately on the moment, not with regret, but with a strange sense of clarity. He had walked into the situation ready to defend an image. He walked out realizing images don't need defense when identity is secure. Keanu, meanwhile, returned to exactly what he'd always done. Nothing different. No statements, no explanations, no victory lap. That consistency spoke louder than anything else. True discipline doesn't spike. It doesn't fluctuate with attention. It remains steady, before, during, and after pressure. And that's what made the outcome unforgettable. Stephen wasn't embarrassed. He was disarmed. Not physically, mentally. And being mentally disarmed can feel like loss, until you realize it's also freedom. Do you think humility is learned through failure or through understanding? Comment failure or understanding. In the days that followed, the story evolved. Not into a tale of rivalry,
but into a discussion about restraint, maturity, and what strength looks like when stripped of performance. Some people sided with Steven's confidence, others admired Keanu's composure, but almost everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't what they expected, and that's what made it powerful. The greatest victories don't always change the world around you. Sometimes they change the way you move through it. Steven walked away more aware. Keanu walked away the same, and that difference said everything. If the strongest outcome is mutual respect, why do we chase conflict so often? Because what followed next, the public reaction, the viral interpretation, the lasting message, would turn this quiet moment into something far bigger, and the world had a lot to say about it.
The moment didn't end when they walked away. It multiplied. What had started as quiet tension between two very different personalities soon turned into a global conversation. Clips, comments, interpretations, everyone seemed to have an opinion. And strangely, the absence of violence made the story louder. People expected drama. They got discipline. Within hours, discussions flooded social media, not about who could hit harder, but about who showed more control. Viewers replayed every word, every pause, every subtle shift in posture. And one theme kept repeating. This didn't feel like a win, but it felt powerful. We're conditioned to see victory as domination. Someone rises, someone falls. But when neither happens, the mind struggles to label the outcome, and that's exactly why this moment stuck. Commentators tried to frame it. Steven backed down. No, Keanu avoided conflict. No, they both won. But none of those explanations fully fit, because what people were reacting to wasn't the outcome. It was the example. Why do you think moments without violence sometimes feel more powerful than fights? Steven Seagal's response afterwards surprised many. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no need to reclaim status. Instead, there was restraint, quieter than usual, but noticeable. For some, that silence felt unfamiliar. For others, it felt earned. Keanu Reeves, true to form, did what he always does. Nothing. No interviews, no explanations, no clarification. And somehow, that made the message even louder. Consistency builds credibility. When someone behaves the same way before attention, during attention, and after attention, people trust the behavior more than the narrative. Fans began sharing personal reflections. This made me rethink how I handle conflict. I realized I confuse calm with weakness. I didn't know strength could look like this. The story escaped celebrity culture and entered something deeper, personal meaning. Have you ever mistaken someone's calmness for weakness, or had your own calm misunderstood? Comment yes or no. Debates continued, but they softened. Less aggression, more thought. People started asking better questions. What does real strength look like in daily life? Why do we admire noise so much? What would happen if more people chose restraint? Stories go viral for many reasons: shock, outrage, spectacle. But stories that linger usually offer something else: reflection. This moment didn't ask people to pick sides. It asked them to look inward. Steven had entered the situation with certainty. Keanu had entered it with clarity. And clarity has a way of changing rooms, even virtual ones. Over time, the conversation matured, less about comparison, more about philosophy. Steven was seen not as defeated, but challenged in a different way. Keanu was seen not as passive, but intentional. Which do you think takes more strength, standing your ground or choosing not to fight? What made this moment resonate wasn't who walked away, it was how they walked away. Steven walked away thoughtful, Keanu walked away unchanged. And in that contrast, people found meaning. Not every story needs a villain, not every conflict needs a winner. Sometimes the most important outcome is a shift in understanding. The world didn't get a fight, it got a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable because they reflect questions, not answers. As the noise faded, one message remained clear across cultures, comments, and perspectives. Control is louder than force. Restraint lasts longer than dominance. And humility doesn't weaken strength, it defines it. Who do you think showed real strength in this story, Steven or Keanu? Comment your honest opinion below. And one last question, maybe the most important one. If we admired self-control as much as we admire power, how different would our world look? Because this story wasn't really about two men. It was about a choice. The choice to escalate, or the choice to understand. And once people saw that clearly, they couldn't unsee it. If this story made you think, reflect, or see strength differently, subscribe for more stories that go beyond the surface.